Well, hello, Natural Resources class. This is the promised recording for Friday's class before spring break. I will expect you to have viewed this video before class on Monday after spring break, and we'll pick it up at the end of these notes. So I've got the notes on the screen here on the left side, and I wanted to start, maybe I'll shrink them just a little bit. I wanted to start with that video that I talked about before our class on Wednesday that deals with old fields, and here, or not video, some still pictures. So this actually is a major field of study currently, looking at these areas that used to be farmland that are now reverting to forest land. And this would be an example from not too far from here of what you might see. I think this might be Carlos Avery, just north and a little bit west of Bethel. So right here, this used to be field, and you can see the forest in the background, and you can see the young trees. These are eastern red cedars that are springing up in the field here now, because it's not grazed, it's not cultivated. Those trees have a chance to germinate, and they are. And then here's another example of an old field converting to woodland, and again, there's a significant study going on of what this is sort of an ecologically unique, distinct area and distinct things going on here, and it's kind of interesting to watch. Here would be another example of an old field with goldenrod in it. And then lastly, this is one I took recently up where I'm from in northern Wisconsin. Again, an old field, and you can see the margins of the old field. And here there are some white pines. Looks like maybe a black cherry coming up there. A lot of white pines coming up here. It won't be very long. Probably within 10 years, this will be fairly dense forest again, and it will have reclaimed that forest land. I don't want you to think that this is sort of the way the whole country would be. Here, for instance, is a flyer I got from western Kansas, and it's talking about tree invasion. Okay, and this is from Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks, and it reads, "It's time to change the way we look at trees on the prairies. While trees provide habitat for some wildlife, they pose a serious threat to grassland-dependent species." So there are areas of our earth that are you could argue, are not meant to have trees. They're meant to have grasses growing on them. And in fact, our removal of wildfire from the ecological environment in a lot of areas has allowed trees to come in where they normally would not have come in. And we'll talk about some more examples of that as we go on. So that's a promise fulfilled. So just looking then at your notes, we left off last time looking at examples of forest products. We talked about lumber production, like your standard yield 2x4. This is a Stimson stud, and it says right here hem fir. So this is hemlock or fir. These are species of conifers that go into making the stud, and they want you to know what the species is, because those species have characteristics that make them good for some things and not so good for other things. Hemlock, for instance, is very prone to what's called ring shake. It'll separate easily along these annual lines. And so there are some things that hemlock does well and other things that it doesn't do well because of its tendency to separate. Then we also talked about OSB, oriented strand board, where you have chips of wood. You can make a large piece of a 4x8 piece of OSB from a small piece of wood by just chipping it up and squeezing those chips together and forming a piece of a board product. This is called tongue and groove because there's a groove here and a tongue would fit into it, and this would be commonly used in flooring where the two pieces would fit together, and it would lend some support to what you were trying to cover, like a subfloor commonly made of this. Plywood, that's this stuff that I showed you in class, where there are different layers that are obvious in here, and again, this is made by taking a piece of wood, a log, and they'll either put that log on a chuck, so they'll put two ends on it like this, and they'll start to turn it, and they'll put a knife up against that, and they'll peel off layers of wood. And I'll show you a video of that when we get back from break. and make these long pieces of wood that are 8 feet long that just kind of peel off a log. And then they'll put them in layers. They'll put one layer this way, and then another layer this way, and another layer this way. And then they'll squeeze them together, and that makes a board product we call plywood that is very tough, harder. It's stronger than the individual boards would be because we're able to change the orientation of the different layers and glue them together. Oftentimes, the lignins, which are sticky substances in wood itself, is all that's needed to stick these layers together. But sometimes they'll add a layer of an adhesive, a glue, as well to stick these together. And as you may know, there are some types of plywood that you can use outside, and some that you can't get outside, can't get wet because they'll separate. So, you know, how they're made can affect how they'll perform too. And then lastly, we talked about paper products, and this is the base item. This is craft paper, and from this, all the other types of paper that we talked about come. And so, so looking then at your notes, and that's kind of left off right here. And so then, if we look at this next line, 70% of forest products are consumed by these countries right here. So India, let me stretch that out just a little bit so they're all there together. China, U.S., China, Japan, Europe, and India. And this 40% is after the U.S. because the U.S. alone consumes 40% of forest products. Look at this next line, though. This is might be a little bit confusing. The U.S. is the second biggest exporter. Canada is the biggest exporter of forest products. But the U.S. is also the biggest importer of forest products. That may seem confusing. How can we be the second biggest exporter and the biggest importer of forest products? Here's how. We may well, so since we're the second biggest exporter and the biggest importer, we may import, and we do, a lot of raw timber, logs from Canada. And so we're importing a lot of forest product, the logs. Well, once we get them, we do something with them. We turn them into a product. It might be plywood or OSB. It might be a piece of furniture. It might be some other product like audio tape or something of that sort. It's amazing the different products that are made from forest products. But so we'll import that forest product, the log. We'll turn it into another product, and in the process we do something called value added, and we make another product that we then export. So you can see how that, in fact, can be true, that we can be a big importer and a big exporter at the same time by adding value to those forest products that we are importing and then exporting them for more money. Okay, lumber prices. Historically, we talked about lumber prices being $12 to $18. MBF, remember, MBF stands for 1,000 board feet. That little M there stands for 1,000 board feet. And in the 1890s, that's what the price was. In 2000, it was $350 for 1,000 board feet. 2008, it went down to $260 a board foot. Per 1,000 board foot. And remember, that's when we had the recession, mortgage-backed securities, people were getting home loans that shouldn't get home loans and then defaulted on them, and our whole economy then just tanked as a result of that. Well, then in 2021, when everybody was stuck at home and doing home improvement projects and the demand for lumber went way up, and then there weren't as many people going to the mills because of COVID restrictions to produce the lumber, we had a shortage, and we see this big spike in lumber prices up to $850 per 1,000 board feet. Well, I just checked today. Chicago Board of Trade lists $575 as the current price for 1,000 board feet of lumber. So we've come down significantly from that high in the 2020s. Okay. Look at the big producers. So if we go to the world and we look around at the world, here's the United States. Okay, so if I just for a moment put borders and labels there, you can see where the border of Canada and United States is. You can see that Canada obviously has a lot of forest land. A lot of this is boreal forest, though. It's smaller spruces and firs. It's not the towering pines that you think of from the original cutover. So here's the Pacific Northwest. You see, it's not real big, is it? And this is the Intermountain. This would be Idaho, Montana. Here's the Intermountain Rocky Mountains. Okay, there's some forest there. Here's the Lake States. Here's us right here. Wisconsin, Upper Michigan, Lower Michigan, Minnesota. Okay, this is the South. We just call that collectively the South, from East Texas all the way to the Atlantic seaboard. And then this would be New England, or the Northeast. And if you look at the whole world, then let's just go over here then, though, and look at Asia, and you can see why Russia is such a huge influence. Could be such a huge. Look at the forest land in Russia. Now, this is, of course, Scandinavia. So here's Sweden, Finland, Norway, and here's Europe. So typically you consider this being European. We go down here to Africa, and you can see, like Congo. This is a lot of rainforest here. Okay, and then we go to Southeast Asia. There's quite a bit of forest land here, and this is Indonesia here. This is all Indonesia. Okay. And then lastly, we'll go over to, let me get back north. We'll go back over to Central and South America. Well, there's a lot of forest there. Of course, this is the Amazon. Here's the Amazon River, and a lot of forest land there. Okay, if you go back to these notes that I had, that I had here. This is the areas that we're talking about that your textbook talked about. Europe has lost 50 to 70% of its original forest cover, but they're not as a big percentage of world forest. Russia has lost less than 20%, and they're a huge percentage of the world's forest. Asia has lost 50%, with the exception being Southeast Asia. Well, that's where most of Asia's forest land is in Southeast Asia. They've only lost about 7% there. Africa about 20%, U.S. about 30%. So worldwide, we've lost 20 to 25% of forest cover. If you look then at that area that I was just trying to highlight, those areas of forest land, this should make sense. The biggest producers in the world are Canada, U.S., Sweden, Finland, Germany, New Zealand, and Brazil. Notice there's some. So here's Brazil. Central America is not listed there. New Zealand, that's kind of interesting because it's not a big landmass, but they are a big lumber producer. In fact, that 2x4 or that 1x4 I had was from New Zealand the other day. Here's Indonesia, Southeast Asia, but they're not big timber producers. This would be Sweden, and this would be Finland here. So they're big timber producers. So you can see that it's not necessarily who's got the most forest, although that plays into it. Like, for instance, Russia here, the most forest. But look at, they're here in italics simply because they're not a big producer of timber, but they could be. Okay? All right. So if I go back to this map, the question I like to ask when we're in class is, looking now just at the United States, and you can see the forested area there, and if I put the borders back up, okay, so this part of the United States, so we've got Pacific Northwest, we've got the Rocky Mountains, we've got the Northeast, we've got the Lake States, we've got the South. Which area of the United States do you think produces the most lumber? Okay, and I think historically people have answered over here in the Pacific Northwest, and that's logical. I mean, they have a reputation for that. But in actuality, it's the South. And this is a big shift that's represented, much of it during your lifetime. So in your notes here, it says in 2005, 63% of U.S. timber was harvested in the South. In an attempt to update that before this lecture, I was able to find and verify that, in fact, yes, the South is still the biggest producer of lumber. The percentages were a little bit hard to nail down. I don't know that it's still 63%, but the reports that I read indicated that they expect that number to grow because labor is cheap. wood is plentiful, and there is not the political issues that the Pacific Northwest faces. Most of Pacific Northwest forests are national forests. And now remember, those were created to log, to produce a supply of timber products. Carefully, scientifically. You don't have national forests as much in the South. It's mostly privately owned. And so those issues are not the same. This is, I say closure of national forests. That's maybe not quite exactly right. It's more of a matter of reduction of harvest on the national forests for a variety of reasons, which we'll talk about in class. Okay, so there is a significant decline there. Okay, so then we've got this line that we talked about in class that, yeah, we don't worldwide get much of our energy needs from wood, but if you look at developing nations, we do, and it's certainly Africa, it's half of their energy needs come from wood. I already mentioned there are two types of forest, tropical rainforests and temperate forest. So remember the images I showed of tropical rainforests like this one. This is a temperate rainforest in Washington State. But if you look at the notes, there are some characteristics of these forests that I wanted to highlight, because again, I think there's some misunderstandings here. Number one, they're about 23% of the world's forest. We lose about 0.46% a year, about 0.5% a year. That's still 10 million acres. That's too much. Now you got to realize this is stats from your textbook, which is 20 years old. So updates to that, that has declined. We no longer lose 10 million acres a year or 0.5% a year. The numbers, well, at least from Amazonia, according to National Geographic, so I will try to get some maybe more reliable sources than that, is that we've dropped down in the Amazon from losing 5 million acres a year down to 1.2 million acres a year. So about a quarter of what we were losing. So if that holds true for the rest of the world, this would be 2.5 million acres and no longer 10 million acres, which is good news. So half of the world's rainforests are in Brazil, Indonesia, Congo. So those areas that I pointed out before. Let me get rid of the borders here. So Brazil, Congo. Right there would be that central equatorial Africa, and then Indonesia, that would be this area right here. Okay, that's where you get a lot of the world's forests. There's also some in Southeast Asia, and some other places around the world. Of course, it gets lots of rain and warm temperatures. It's a very diverse type of setting, but this may be surprising to you that it has poor soil, and if I show you an image here, oops, maybe, let's see, yeah, this image here. Hopefully this will make sense. Here's a rainforest setting, and this is a stream cut bank, and you can just see this little rim of brown here. That's where the nutrients that might be available are. Nutrients that come from leaves that are dropped, limbs that are dropped, and from the fast-growing vegetation there. But there's so much rain that any nutrients that are here are quickly washed through the soil profile, and you can see sort of a pale tan whitish look here. That just indicates what we call a lot of leaching. A lot of that organic matter has been washed right out of the soil profile. And here, this would be this is an Ohio soil. This is a lot of organic matter in it. Another thing that you'll see in tropical forests soils is buildup of iron and aluminum, and because iron and aluminum are very insoluble, very hard to dissolve, and so they hang around. Well, they make soils very acidic. The particle size of these soils can get very small because of all that weathering, and they can turn into clay-sized particles, which is the smallest soil particle, and they will actually, if you remove the vegetation, they will bake hard and crack like you see over here. Bottom line is, those tropical soils are not fertile soils. Yep, there's a lot of rainfall there. The vegetation that's there gets the nutrients that are available quickly in that surface layer of soil, but then the rest are washed quickly out, and really it's not a good place to farm. And you try to grow something on this hard pan, and it really won't do well. And so if I go back to, back to your notes, if I can go back to your notes, having troubles, there we go. That hopefully will make some sense of this line right here, these lines right here. Temperate soils, by contrast, and you can figure out what a temperate soil looks like. Temperate forests that we looked at. They're temperate forests, are by far the majority of the world's forests. If you remember that, looking at Russia, Scandinavia, Canada, North America, most all of that forest land was temperate forest. And guess what, folks? We're actually gaining 3.6 million acres per year. And we'll talk about how that's happening. Some of that is farmland that's reverting to forest. In fact, most of that is farmland that's reverting to forest. A little bit of it is cleared land that's reverting to forest for other reasons. But in these situations, we have less rain. It's less diverse, moderate to poor soil, good for growing trees, not great for growing corn. And we're seeing a big gain. And you'll see that this is from the U.S. Statistical Abstract. Here's a few data points that reinforce that particular fact of life. Okay, so we'll pick it up there with this concept of silviculture next time, and I'll sort of reiterate some of this. So hopefully you're having a good spring break, and I will see you when we get back.